Here is what nobody at that anniversary table understood until it was too late. 2 years earlier, an 84-year-old woman had wired $185,000 north from a farm she had just sold, and she had done it for one reason only: to buy a house for her granddaughter. Not for anyone else. For her. And for 2 full years, that granddaughter kept paying rent on a cold, cramped 1-bedroom apartment, never knowing a 3-bedroom brick house 20 minutes away already had her name written all over the paperwork behind it, just not on the deed. Somebody had taken that gift and quietly handed it to someone else, and they had done it so cleanly, so convincingly, that even the woman who wrote the check had no idea her money had gone anywhere but where she sent it. What finally cracked it open wasn't an accountant, and it wasn't a lawyer. It was one small, offhand joke about a rent increase, said out loud at a dinner table over roast and wine glasses, in front of the very people who had spent 2 years making sure that joke never got the chance to be said. By the end of that dinner, an old woman with a cane and a spine of steel would ask a single question that stopped every fork in the room. 3 days later, a sealed envelope would turn up in the back of a china cabinet, untouched for 2 years, with one name written on the front in careful, old-fashioned handwriting. And weeks after that, a woman who had spent her whole life being the one everyone leaned on would sit across a dining table from her own mother and sign her name to something that would end, once and for all, who owed who in that family. This is a story about a family that had a system for exactly one kind of daughter, the kind who covers things, who fixes things, who never asks for anything back. And it's about the one night that system finally broke. If you've ever been the one in your family who quietly paid for everyone else's piece, you are going to feel this story in your chest. Watching from where? Please comment. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, and I found out about my house at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner. My grandmother set her fork down, looked straight at me over the candles, and asked how I was liking the house she'd bought me, all while I was paying $1,180 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment with a shower that only ran warm 2 days out of 3. I remember my sister's wine glass freezing halfway to her mouth. I remember my mother standing up too quickly to refill water glasses that were already full. What my grandmother did next caught the whole table off guard. And what I found 3 days later, sealed inside my mother's china cabinet, was worse than anything anyone said that night out loud. Before all of this was over, I would sign a document my family never expected, sit across that same table from my mother, and find out exactly what my place in this family had really cost, right down to the dollar. Welcome back to the channel, where family secrets come out into the light and quiet. Women finally stop footing the bill for everyone else's comfort. If stories about standing up for yourself matter to you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe, because you'll want to hear how one woman with a cane and a calm smile took an entire family apart without ever once raising her voice. Let me take you back a week before all this happened. I worked the night shift in the pediatric intensive care unit at a children's hospital in Dayton, Ohio. 12 years on that floor now. I put myself through nursing school running double shifts and living on gas station coffee, and I've held the hands of more terrified mothers than I could ever count. I'm good in a crisis. It's the ordinary, quiet weeks that end up costing me. That Tuesday, I got home from a night shift around 8 in the morning and found a letter taped to my mailbox from the property management company. Starting the 1st of next month, my rent was jumping from $940 to $1,180, an extra $140 a month, just so I could keep fighting over the same parking spot. I stuck the letter to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a chicken, watered the little plant on my windowsill, whose name is Gus, don't ask, and did the math standing right there in my kitchen. I could make it work. I could always make it work. That's the trouble with being the daughter who handles things. Eventually, nobody bothers asking whether you should have to. I'm the one my family calls when my father's blood pressure medication changes, when the insurance company won't cooperate, when there's a form that needs reading carefully, or an unpleasant phone call that has to be made. I keep a folder of their paperwork the same way I keep patient charts, organized, dated, ready to go. That week, I only had one thing on my calendar that wasn't a hospital shift: my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, which I was cooking, naturally. I honestly thought the biggest challenge of the night would be pulling the roast out at the right time. I have never been more wrong about a dinner in my life. To really understand my family, all you have to do is watch us set a table. My mother, Diane, 63, runs the show. She spent 30 years managing the front office of an elementary school, and she has never walked into a room she didn't feel the need to rearrange. My father, Frank, 65, a retired electrician, checks the weather constantly, more when things are calm, and even more when they aren't. A storm 2 states away has gotten that man out of more arguments than any lawyer ever could. And then there's my younger sister, Paige, 31, an office manager at a dental practice, divorced 2.5 years now from a man named Derek, who left the same way he showed up, suddenly, and with someone else. She has a 5-year-old son named Owen, who is honestly the best thing our family has produced in a generation. I love all of them. I want that said plainly before anything else gets said. When I was 11, Paige spent 4 nights in the hospital with a bad asthma flare, and I stayed home making boxed macaroni for my father while our mother slept in a chair on the ward. When they finally came home, my mother rested her hand on my head like she was handing out a paycheck and said, "Family takes care of family." I stood a little taller. I was 11. I hadn't figured out yet that in our house, that sentence only ever pointed one way. Some families pass down china or a cabin at the lake. Mine passed down a job description. There was the daughter who needed looking after, and the daughter who did the looking after, and nobody ever once asked me which one I wanted to be. I would have told you it never bothered me. I would have kept saying that right up until the night of that dinner. There was history here, and I want to be honest about it, because for years I convinced myself it was a one-time thing. When I was 17, I had a small college fund, nothing huge, some savings bonds from my grandparents, birthday money, 3 summers of lifeguarding wages. My mother kept it in an account under her name to keep it safe, she said. The winter I was filling out college applications, Paige cracked 2 front teeth falling off a trampoline, and the orthodontist's estimate read like a mortgage payment, braces, oral surgery, all of it. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that the family needed to borrow from my fund, just for now, and that I was the one who could handle it. I told her no. I remember looking her dead in the eye at 17 and telling her that money was mine. She said something I would hear again half my life later. "The account is in my name, honey. Custodial. For your own protection." There was nothing a minor could do about a custodial account, and by the time I wasn't a minor anymore, the account wasn't anything at all. I worked nights, finished 2 years of community college, and walked into nursing school owing nobody in that house a cent, which I mistook for winning. Nobody in my family ever called it stealing. It was borrowing, shifting funds, helping out, tiding someone over. Money in my family moved the way rivers move, quietly, downhill, always toward Paige. And here's the part that matters most. I knew all of it. I wasn't naive. I just believed the river only ran through bank accounts and birthday envelopes, through small things. I believed there was a line somewhere they wouldn't cross. There was no line. The anniversary dinner was, naturally, my production. 40 years of marriage, celebrated at my parents' house in Beaver Creek, 20 minutes from my apartment. I took the Friday off, ordered the cake, ironed the tablecloth my mother insists is heirloom Irish linen and is very obviously from a department store in 1989, and I picked my grandmother up from the airport. Eleanor Voss, 84, my mother's mother, flying in from Sarasota, Florida, where she'd moved into a senior community after my grandfather Roy passed away 3.5 years earlier. The 2 of them had farmed soybeans outside a small town called Xenia for 50 years. After he died, she sold everything, the house, the barn, 60 acres of land, and headed south for the sunshine. She stepped off that jet bridge using her cane like a walking stick, not a crutch, wearing lipstick and a good wool coat in the middle of April. My grandmother has a spine you could use to check if a wall is straight. She hugged me hard at the curb and held on just 1 second longer than usual, which I noticed and quietly filed away, the way nurses notice things. In the car, she asked about my shifts, about Gus the plant, about whether my mother was still rearranging everyone else's kitchens. She didn't ask about Paige, which was strange for her. At the house, she kissed everyone hello, praised the roast, and settled quietly into the good chair while my mother narrated the flower arrangements. I caught her scanning the dining room slowly, corner to corner, the way you look over a bill before you sign it. I thought, she's just tired from the flight. I have replayed that look 100 times since. She wasn't tired. She was counting something, and whatever the total came to, it didn't add up. Dinner started the way our dinners always start. My father telling the story of how he and my mother met. My mother correcting every detail. Everyone laughing right on cue. Paige had Owen show off how he could write his whole name, first and last, plus a little dinosaur next to it. Honestly, it was the best moment of the night. Somewhere between the roast and the salad, Paige mentioned she was redoing her back patio, easy as anything, pavers, maybe a fire pit. My mother lit up. My father said pavers were smart, low maintenance. And because I apparently can't let a quiet moment sit, I laughed and said, "Well, don't hire me. My landlord just raised my rent $140, so my patio budget is a lawn chair parked in a parking spot." It was a joke. Everyone chuckled. Everyone except my grandmother. I'd been watching her most of the night, and I saw that joke land on her like a change in the weather. She stopped chewing. She looked at me. Not a glance. A real look. The kind she used to give a soybean field right before a hailstorm hit. Then she looked at my mother, and something in her expression closed like a ledger being shut. She set her fork down slowly, deliberately, the way you'd lay a flag over a coffin. The table kept talking around her. Owen wanted more rolls. My father was saying something about sealant for the patio. And through all of it, my grandmother sat perfectly still, hands folded, waiting for a gap in the noise, patient as frost. I felt something coming before I had any idea what it was. 12 years in an ICU teaches you the exact sound a room makes right before the alarms start going off. The gap opened when my mother stood to clear the salad plates. My grandmother smiled, and I want to describe that smile carefully, because it's burned into my memory. It was the smile you give a child you love who has just told you an obvious lie. She turned to me and said, "So, how do you like the house I bought you?" I blinked. What house? I still lived in my tiny apartment. I actually laughed a little when I asked, because I assumed it was the start of a joke, or maybe a slip of the tongue, the kind of thing you gently steer a grandparent around. Nobody laughed with me. The room went completely silent. Fork against plate, silent. The hum of the furnace, silent. Every eye at that table turned, not to my grandmother, to my parents. That's the detail that has stayed with me. Confusion looks up. Guilt looks sideways at each other. My mother was standing there with the water pitcher in both hands, pouring into a glass that was already full, water climbing right up to the rim. "Mom, you're tired," she said, in a voice I had never heard her use before, high and smooth at the same time, like a recorded customer service message. My father studied the door to the garage like the weather report might be hiding behind it. Paige stared at her plate so hard I thought it might crack. And Owen, 5 years old, God bless him, looked around the table and asked, "What house?" out of the mouths of children. Nobody answered him either. My grandmother let the silence stretch for one long breath, then another. Then she did the one thing none of us saw coming. She laughed. This woman who had just dropped a live grenade into the middle of a 40th anniversary dinner waved her own question away like smoke and said, "Oh, old age, don't mind me. I get my stories crossed." Then she raised her glass, wished my parents 40 more years, and asked for the potatoes. The whole table exhaled at once. My mother laughed too loudly. My father found his appetite again. Paige started breathing normally. Within 5 minutes, the dinner had closed back over that moment like still water. Everyone bought it. Everyone but me, because I was still watching her hands. My grandmother's hands were completely steady. No shaking, no fumbling, no confused old woman anywhere in sight. She ate her potatoes, told a story about my grandfather and a stubborn steer, and her eyes stayed cool the entire time. I sat there with my pulse climbing the way it does when you walk into a room where the monitors are quiet, but every number is wrong. When the cake was cut and the coats came out, my mother announced that Frank would drive Grandma back to her hotel. My grandmother pulled on her gloves without even looking up and said, "Claire will take me." Not a question. My mother started to object, and my grandmother added, "She's on my way. Nobody in Beaver Creek is really on anybody's way." We drove the first 10 minutes without a word, her cane resting across her knees like a rifle. In the hotel parking lot, she finally turned to me, and there was nothing confused left in her face at all. "I'm not senile, Claire, and I'm not tired. 2 years ago, I sold the farm and wired your mother $185,000 for a house, for you." We sat in her hotel room until almost 1 in the morning while she laid it all out the way she used to lay out seed invoices. No drama, every number face up. After my grandfather passed, she'd sold the farm for $410,000. She banked half of a lifetime and asked herself what the rest of it was for. What she wanted, she told me, was to watch her money do some good while she was still alive to see it happen. Paige had already gotten the big wedding years back, open bar and all. I'd gotten a card. My grandmother knew it, had always known it, the way she knew which field would flood first after a hard rain. So the plan was simple. A house for Claire, bought quietly, handed over on my 32nd birthday with a bow tied to the mailbox. She'd just had a knee replaced that spring and couldn't fly, couldn't stand at a closing table in Ohio. So when my mother offered to handle everything, the search, the paperwork, the keys, my grandmother thanked God for having such a capable daughter and wired the money north, $185,000, with the purpose spelled out right there on the transfer memo. Then she waited for her phone to ring. It never did. What arrived instead, 2 weeks after the closing, was a thank you bouquet, lilies and white roses, with a florist's card signed with my name. I kept that card, she said, pulling her purse into her lap. It's the only thank you I ever got from you, and it didn't even sound like you. You would have called me. You would have cried and made the whole thing wonderfully awkward, like a proper granddaughter. She held the little florist card out to me, and my hands went cold. I had never sent my grandmother flowers in my life. Someone had been writing my lines for 2 years, and I wanted to know what else I'd apparently said. Here's how you keep a stolen house standing for 2 years. You build a fence around every single conversation. My mother had told my grandmother a story, and the story was me. Claire is overwhelmed, Mom. Claire is private about money. You know how proud she is. And the load-bearing beam underneath all of it, Claire begged us to keep the house quiet because Paige just went through the divorce, and she can't stand the thought of her sister feeling small next to her. Don't bring it up on the phone. Let Claire mention it whenever she's ready. My grandmother, a woman raised on tact the way other people are raised on scripture, honored that request for 2 full years. She genuinely thought she was protecting me. Every polite silence was a brick, and my own mother had gotten my grandmother to lay every one of them. Once, early on, my grandmother slipped. She asked me on the phone, "Are you settled in, sweetheart?" I'd just moved that fall into the new 1-bedroom with the cold shower, so I chirped, "Yes, I love it. It's small, but it's mine." My mother happened to be in the room in Sarasota when my grandmother repeated that back later, wondering out loud why I'd called a 3-bedroom house small. My mother laughed it off and said, "That's Claire for you. She'd call a castle cozy," and changed the subject. Whenever my grandmother's doubts started creeping in, no photos, no housewarming, no updated address on the Christmas cards, my mother had an answer ready for that too. "Mom, you were on pain medication for half of that year. You're remembering things sideways. They used her own new knee against her. They used my own voice against her. Let me ask you something before I keep going, because I have wondered about it every day since. Has your family ever written your lines for you? Stayed silent in your name? Apologized on your behalf without asking? Tell me in the comments and subscribe, because what I found 3 days later inside my mother's china cabinet, I am still not over. In that hotel room, my grandmother finally asked me the only question that mattered. "What do you want to do, Claire?" I didn't answer right away, and she didn't push. Instead, she told me one more thing, and it's the detail that finally cracked through the professional calm I wear like scrubs. She told me that the day she wired the money, she also sat down at her kitchen table in Sarasota and wrote me a card by hand, using the good pen my grandfather had given her the year they finally paid off the tractor. She sealed it, wrote my name on the front, and mailed it to my mother with one instruction. "Give this to Claire along with the keys." She still remembered every word of it, because she'd drafted it twice to get it exactly right. "So you never have to ask anyone for a roof again. Love, Grandma." She told me my grandfather hated debt more than he hated hail, and that the two of them used to lie awake in the hard years listening to the mortgage breathe down the hallway like a third person living in the house, a roof nobody could ever call in. That was the entire gift. That was the whole point. I asked her if she'd ever seen that card again. She said no. She'd assumed it was tucked away in a drawer somewhere, saved, because that's what I do. And she was right. That is exactly what I do. I have every card she's ever sent me rubber banded together in a shoebox with the sympathy notes from my grandfather's funeral. There was no card in that shoebox because it had never actually reached me. Until that night, I hadn't even known to miss it. I stood up and grabbed my coat. She asked where I thought I was going at midnight, and my own voice came out flat and level, my code blue voice. I need to see the house tonight. The address wasn't hard to find. I'd been mailing birthday cards to it for 2 years. 214 Meadowlark Lane, Fairborn, 15 minutes from my parents' house. I parked across the street a little before 1 in the morning and sat there with the engine ticking. A small brick ranch, 3 bedrooms, porch light glowing gold over a welcome mat shaped like a sunflower. Paige's wind chimes, the same ones from her old apartment balcony, hung by the front door, dead still in the cold. On the driveway, in fading sidewalk chalk, someone small had drawn a rocket ship and a little stick figure family of 2. I sat in my car looking at my own house with my sister's entire life inside it, and the worst memory of that night rose up slow, like floodwater. 2 years earlier, I had helped Paige move in. I took a Saturday off after a night shift and carried her couch through that red front door myself. I hung Owen's curtains, the ones with the planets printed on them. I brought a housewarming gift, a cast-iron skillet, because Paige never owned one. I stood in that kitchen drinking store-brand lemonade while my mother told everyone how blessed we all were that the down payment had worked out. I'd asked once where the money came from, a small 3-bedroom house with no mortgage sign, no lender paperwork sitting on the counter. My father, checking the weather on his phone as usual, said something about Grandma's land money helping out with some of Grandpa's old parcels. You know how it is. It had sounded almost true. It was even half true. I had carried boxes into my own stolen house and thanked them all for letting me help. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. A text from my mother. Coffee tomorrow? Just us girls. We should talk about Grandma. She's been confused lately. I went to that coffee. I want to be clear that I walked in already knowing, and I sat in my parents' kitchen in Beaver Creek with my hands wrapped around a mug I never drank from because the nurse in me wanted the vitals before the diagnosis. My mother worked through her opening like she'd practiced it in the shower. Grandma's getting older. She's been muddled since the knee replacement, since Grandpa passed, since the move. Grief does strange things. It might be time to talk about her affairs as a family. She said as a family the way some people say amen. Then she reached over, squeezed my wrist, and said the money question had really been complicated, sweetheart. That Grandma's gift had honestly been meant for both of us girls in a way. That Paige had nowhere to go after Derek left, that there was a baby to think about, and things had just happened fast. I let her finish. My father passed through the kitchen once, mentioned Rain moving in on Thursday, and vanished into the garage. I asked one question, and it wasn't rhetorical. Whose name is on the deed, Mom? She refilled my mug. Houses, names, that's just paperwork, Claire. What matters is that family has a roof. And there it was, my entire life summed up in one sentence. What's mine is paperwork, what's hers is a roof. And while she said it, her eyes flicked, just once, toward the china cabinet in the dining room, the tall oak one with the drawer where 40 years of this family's paperwork lives. Then the phone rang, the neighbor calling about the fence line, and my mother stepped out into the yard, her voice going bright. I stood up. I know that drawer. I've done their taxes at that dining room table for 10 years. I know it the way I know a crash cart. 3rd drawer down, deeds and titles in the green folder, insurance in the red one. I won't pretend my hands weren't shaking. The green folder had a new manila envelope inside it, unlabeled, and inside that envelope was the entire machine laid bare. The settlement statement for 214 Meadowlark Lane, closed 25 months earlier. Purchase price $185,000, paid in full, no lender involved. The deed recorded at the county, the grantee's name typed out clean as a verdict, Paige M. Whitmore, unmarried woman. A printout of the incoming wire from Eleanor Voss. And right there in the memo line, in my grandmother's own careful handwriting, the words, for Claire's house. Underneath all of it, at the very bottom of the envelope, a small square shape I recognized before I even touched it. A greeting card envelope, ivory-colored, soft at the corners now, just my name written on the front in my grandmother's upright farm ledger handwriting. Claire. Still sealed. 2 years sitting in a drawer 8 feet from where this family eats Thanksgiving dinner. Nobody had even bothered to open it. I don't know why that was the detail that broke me. Not the deed. Not the wire transfer. That was the thing. I photographed every page with my phone, put the folder back exactly the way I found it, and took the card because it had my name on it, and it was mine. I read it sitting in my car in the driveway. For Claire, so you never have to ask anyone for a roof again. Love, Grandma. I was still sitting there when my mother tapped on my window, waved warmly, and said through the glass, "Family carries family, Claire. Remember that this week." Then she smiled and went back inside. Warm as ever. An assignment delivered with a wave. I gave myself one day. Then I knocked on that red door I'd once carried a couch through. Paige answered, still in her dental office scrubs, hair in the same crooked bun she's worn since middle school. When she saw my face, she stepped back like the porch had tilted underneath her. We talked quietly in the kitchen, because Owen was building something loud out of blocks in the living room. I asked what she knew, and to her credit, the only credit I could give her that day, she didn't try to perform innocence. She knew the money had come from Grandma's farm sale. Our mother had told her Grandma wanted to help while she was still alive to see it. When Paige had once asked whether she should call and thank her, our mother said no. Grandma hates a fuss, honey. Don't make it weird. It's handled. So she never asked again. She signed wherever the title company pointed and moved her broken life into a free house, choosing every single day for 2 years not to wonder why a proud 84-year-old farm woman had never once come to see the things she'd bought. "Would you have asked?" she said, her voice cracking. "If it were you, Claire? I had a baby and half a savings account, and Derek took the car." Then Owen ran in holding a sheet of dinosaur stickers, demanded I wear the Triceratops, and ran back out. We both stood there while the argument quietly died of shame. Paige wiped her eyes with her wrist. "What do you want me to do? Rip up the deed? Put Owen out on the street?" I looked at the sticker on the back of my hand. It's a lot easier to stay angry at people who don't also hand you dinosaurs. I told her the truth. I don't know yet. I went back to work, because the ICU is the one place in my life where my job description is written down clearly. 2 nights later, we stabilized a 9-year-old brought in from a rollover accident on Route 35. At 4 a.m, his mother, a complete stranger, a woman whose name I'd only known for 6 hours, gripped my hand at the elevator and thanked me like I'd built the hospital myself. I stood there thinking, strangers thank me more than my own family ever has. On my break, I told my coworker Monica the entire story over vending machine coffee. Monica's been a nurse for 15 years and has the bedside manner of a nail gun. She listened to the whole thing, then said, "You know what you're doing right now? You're triaging them, assessing, stabilizing, managing everyone else's pain." She crushed her paper cup. "They're not your patients, Claire. You're allowed to be the one who's bleeding." I drove home to my own apartment, my own cold shower, and did the only thing I know how to do when the numbers stop adding up. I charted. I opened my laptop and built a timeline, because nurses chart for a reason, memory lies, and so do mothers. Every entry got a date and a source. The farm sale, the wire transfer 25 months earlier with the memo line, the closing, the deed, the recorded transfer, the florist card, the phone call where my "I love it" got clipped out of context and stitched into their story, my rent increase letter, their patio pavers. When I finished, it was 4 pages long, no adjectives, and it read exactly like what it was. Not a misunderstanding, not a complicated family situation. A plan carried out by people who knew me well enough to know I'd be too useful to ever suspect them. It turned out my grandmother hadn't spent 2 weeks in Ohio just to eat cake. Before she even boarded her flight north, she'd already found herself an estate attorney in Dayton, Linda Marsh, a woman around 55 who wears her reading glasses on a chain and wastes absolutely nothing, sympathy included. I drove my grandmother to the appointment, planning to wait outside, and she said, "You're coming in. It's your gift." That settled the matter. Linda went through my timeline page by page, the way a surgeon reads scans. When she reached the wire memo, she actually tapped it twice with her pen. For Claire's house, in writing, on a bank record, with corroborating emails and a handwritten card. She looked up. "I do this for a living, and I want you to really hear me. This paper trail is unusually clean. Money entrusted for a stated purpose, then converted for another use entirely. That isn't a family disagreement. That's conversion. Civilly, it's very winnable. Depending on how the county prosecutor feels about it, it could end up being more than civil. The word criminal sat down at that table with us, and nobody asked it to leave." Linda laid out the path forward. First, a demand letter. Return the $185,000 within 30 days. Then a civil suit if they refused, with the option of a criminal referral left on the table. Then my grandmother did something I didn't expect for the second time that week. She folded her hands, looked at Linda, and said, "None of this moves without Claire. It was her gift. She decides how hard we swing." Everyone turned to me. I asked for a few days to think. I drove home, climbed my stairs, and found 6 voicemails waiting, every one of them from my mother. I called her back that night, and I'm glad I was sitting down. It came in stages, like watching a storm move across a field. Stage 1 was outrage. "A lawyer, Claire? You took your own grandmother to a lawyer over family?" As if the lawyer were the crime instead of the reason for it. Stage 2 was revision. It was all a misunderstanding. The gift was always meant to be flexible. And then, "I promise you this is true," she tried. "We did it this way to protect you from gift taxes. I handled the paperwork in this family so that one didn't survive contact with reality." "There's no tax on that gift, Mom," I said. "It falls under the lifetime exemption, and you know that, because I'm the one who explained it to you when Grandma sold the farm." 3 seconds of silence on the line, and that's when I got the truth, because with my mother, stage 3 is always the truth, delivered like a slammed door. Her voice dropped into a register I'd only ever heard her use on other people. "Fine. Yes. We used it for Paige. She was drowning, Claire. She had a baby, and that man left her with nothing." A pause. Then, flat as a nutrition label, "You didn't need it." Not an apology. Not even really a defense. A policy statement. You didn't need it. I stood in my kitchen listening to my mother explain that my own inheritance from a living, breathing grandmother had been means-tested at her dining room table without me. And I finally understood completely that this had never been a mistake anyone was going to fix. It was a system working exactly the way it was designed to work. I said goodnight, then sat down and made my decision about the letter that would come next. My father showed up at my apartment the following evening, holding his cap in both hands like a man walking into a funeral home. I made him decaf. He sat on the edge of my couch, the twin of the one living in Paige's living room, in my house, though I didn't say that part out loud. He asked me to make it stop. That was his exact phrase. "Make it stop, Claire." He said my grandmother was old, that this lawyer business would poison whatever years she had left, that a family could survive almost anything except a courtroom. Then he made his offer, and it was so sad I had to look over at Gus on the windowsill just to keep my face still. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. Tell her you knew about the house and you were fine with it all along. She'll settle down. She'll rewrite whatever paperwork needs rewriting. Paige keeps her roof, and I will pay you back myself, every single cent. I promise you that. A 65-year-old retired electrician on a fixed pension, promising me $185,000 in the exact same tone he used to promise the water heater had one more winter left in it. I asked him the only thing I actually needed answered. "You were at the closing, Dad. You saw the deed say Paige. 2 years of Sunday dinners, and you watched Grandma get managed like cattle through a chute. Why?" He stared at his shoes for a long time. "Your mother was so sure it was the right call," he finally said. "And you're strong, Claire. You've always been the strong one. Paige isn't." There it was again, the whole family equation, laid bare. He hugged me on his way out the door. I love my father. That hug felt like a receipt. Paige came the day after that, and she brought Owen with her, and I will never fully forgive her for that, because it worked exactly the way she knew it would. Owen came barreling in holding a drawing. "My house," he announced proudly, a brick rectangle with a red door and a rocket ship, and off to the side, holding a stick figure balloon, a tall figure labeled Aunt Claire. He stuck it to my fridge himself, under the chicken magnet, right next to my rent increase letter, then went off to negotiate terms with Gus. Paige stood in my kitchen and half apologized the way our family always half apologizes, sorry as a throat clearing rather than an actual sentence. Then she got to the point. "Mom says if you sign a letter saying you knew about it and were okay with it, this all goes away. Grandma calms down, nobody sues anybody, we're a family again by Christmas." She even had the decency to look sick while she said it. I asked if she'd read the letter herself. She said Mom already had it ready, that it was short. Of course it was short. It only had one job, to move the lie out of their mouths and into mine, signed, notarized, permanent. My mother had come at me with an assignment. My father had come at me with a promise he couldn't keep, and now my sister was coming at me with a 5-year-old and a crayon drawing. 3 people I love in 1 week, all holding out the exact same pen. If you've ever held that pen, if the cost of keeping the peace in your house always seemed to land on exactly one person, and that person was you, tell me in the comments what you did. And stay with me, because Saturday was coming, and I wasn't going to be the one bringing a pen. The night before I made my decision, I sat with my grandmother in her hotel room, and she told me exactly where all of this had started, because she said I deserved to know what I was really up against. It wasn't greed, she told me. It went back much further than that. When my mother was 16, my grandfather's tractor rolled on the back slope of the old farm and took his left leg below the knee. 1979. No disability check for a self-employed farmer, no neighbors who could spare more than a casserole. So my grandmother did what the situation demanded. She took the night shift at the local cannery and handed my mother, 16 years old, the house keys and 2 younger brothers to raise. I'd leave at 4 and come home around 2 in the morning, she said, and the dishes would be done and the boys would be fed. And every single night I would tell her, "Claire, like it was a prayer, you're my strong one." I thought I was giving her a medal. She looked down at her hands, at her wedding ring, worn thin as wire. I was handing her a bill. She paid it for 6 years, and nobody ever paid her back. And she has spent 40 years since making absolutely sure that bill gets handed to someone else. Because if the strong one doesn't have to carry everything, then what was her whole girlhood even for? She looked me in the eye. I'm the one who invented the thing that's eating you alive right now. I'm the one who taught your mother that love in this family flows toward whoever's drowning, and the swimmer gets a compliment instead of a hand. She was quiet for a moment. I'm 84. I don't have time left to be tactful about it. She wasn't rescuing me, I realized. She was paying down her own debt. And there's a difference, and it mattered. The letter showed up in my mailbox the next day, hand-delivered, no stamp, just my name written in my mother's handwriting, which told me she'd driven 20 minutes rather than say any of it to my face. Inside was a single-typed page, drafted for my signature. I, Claire Whitmore, was informed of and consented to the use of funds provided by Eleanor Voss toward the purchase of the property at 214 Meadowlark Lane. It read like she'd typed it wearing gloves, clipped to it, a sticky note in her round, cheerful handwriting. Sign it and come to Sunday dinner. We'll put this all behind us. Behind us. As if the last 2 years had been a pothole instead of a road they'd paved themselves. I sat at my kitchen table that night with 3 pieces of paper lined up in a row, and I'm not ashamed to admit I sat there a long time. On the left, the letter, sign it and keep my family, whatever that word was still worth, every holiday intact, every Sunday dinner warm, and the lie becomes load-bearing forever, with my own name holding it up. In the middle, my phone, open to photos of the deed and the wire transfer. On the right, my grandmother's card, ivory and soft at the corners. So you never have to ask anyone for a roof again. 2 versions of myself sitting on one table, the one who covers things, and whoever was standing on the other side of that. Around midnight, I noticed the strangest thing about that letter. The one detail my mother would never fully understand. It was the first time in 34 years that anyone in my family had needed something only I could give them. Monday morning, I called in a personal day. There was a signature I needed to give, and it wasn't theirs. Linda's office smells like paper and lemon oil, and that Monday morning, it was the calmest room I'd stood in for 2 weeks. She had the affidavit ready. It wasn't long, and every line of it was true, which is a strange thing to notice about a document until you've spent days holding its opposite. I, Claire Whitmore, was never informed of the gift. I never received it. I never consented to its diversion. I attached my timeline and the photographs of the settlement statement, the deed, the wire memo with my name written right on it. A notary in a cardigan watched me sign, stamped it with that little embossing squeeze that makes everything official. And that was it. No thunder. If you want the honest truth, it felt like calling a time of death. The moment itself is quiet and procedural, and it only breaks you later, in the parking lot. Linda walked me through what came next in her flat, kind voice. The demand letter would go out that week, certified mail, return the $185,000 within 30 days, or face a civil action for conversion with all supporting documentation attached, meaning my affidavit. "They'll know it's you the second they open it," she said. Not as a warning, just as fact. I nodded. In a way, I couldn't have explained to her that was the entire point. I had spent my whole life being the name my family never put on anything. They'd put me on a florist's card, on a script, on a 2-year-long lie. Now my name was on the truth, notarized, and no amount of Sunday dinners could ever unsign it. I sat in my car in that parking lot and just breathed. The letter would land in my mother's mailbox by Thursday. Thursday night, my phone started ringing in cycles, like contractions. Thursday night was fury. How could you, after everything this family has done for you? A sentence I turned over in my head for a while like a strange rock. Friday morning was tears, my mother's voice wet and wounded, asking what kind of person sends lawyers after her own mother, which was a remarkable way to frame it, considering which direction the money had actually traveled. Friday night was ice. We got the letter. I hope it was worth it. Your father can't eat. I didn't call back, not out of cruelty. I'd simply finally noticed that every conversation with my mother happened in a room she'd already arranged ahead of time, and I was done walking into arranged rooms. By the weekend, her version of events was already circulating. My cousin Karen texted me a screenshot from the family group chat, one I'd apparently been quietly removed from. Claire is suing her own mother over a misunderstanding about Grandma's money. Poor Eleanor is being taken advantage of by a lawyer. My Aunt Denise, my father's sister, a woman I had personally driven to 2 colonoscopy appointments, sent me a single line. "Hope you're proud of yourself." Sunday came, and for the first time in my adult life, Sunday dinner in Beaver Creek happened without me. I know because Paige, out of either habit or guilt, posted a photo of Owen holding a biscuit, and behind him you could see the table fully set, with one chair pulled out and empty, like a missing tooth. I didn't respond to any of it. No corrections in the group chat, no counter-story, no screenshots fired back like artillery. The truth was already traveling by certified mail. It didn't need my help. Then Tuesday, my father called, not to apologize, to summon. He used his careful voice, the one he saves for ice storms and downed power lines. Saturday, at the house. "Your mother wants to settle this, all of us at the table like adults. Bring your grandmother." In the background, I could hear my mother not quite whispering instructions, and I understood the shape of it immediately. This would be an ambush dressed up as a peace summit. A united front, the letter laid out on the table, Owen positioned somewhere visible, and me maneuvered back into my usual seat by pure familial gravity. I said we'd be there. I heard my mother exhale in the background, satisfied, and I let her be satisfied, because it was the very last thing I would ever hand her for free. I spent that week getting ready in my own way. I worked my shifts, slept badly, and charted anyway. I had one long phone call with Linda and one short one with my grandmother, who listened to what I was planning to say, went quiet for a moment, and then told me, "Roy would have liked seeing you in a fight." I put her card in the inside pocket of my good coat, where I could feel the corner of it press against my ribs. Saturday morning, I stood in front of my mirror the way I stand outside a room right before a code. Breathe in, run through the equipment. Know your job. I walked into that house calm, steady, and already certain that somebody's version of this family was going to flatline at that table. It just wasn't going to be mine. They'd set the dining room up like a holiday, the department store Irish linen, the good dishes, a coffee cake nobody would end up touching. Same table as the anniversary. My chair sat in its usual place, and I want you to notice, the way I did, that everyone still expected me to sit in the exact spot I'd sat in my whole life. Owen had been installed in the den with the cartoons turned up loud. My grandmother took the seat beside me, cane hooked over the table's edge, hands folded. My mother waited until the coffee was poured, hostess to the very end, then presented the family's solution with all the bright, efficient warmth of someone announcing a new carpool schedule. Point 1, Paige and Owen stay in the house because a 5-year-old needs stability, and surely nobody here wants to punish a child. Point 2, her father and I will make it right with Grandma, $300 a month, every month, faithfully, until the full amount is repaid. Point 3, I sign the letter, Grandma calls off the lawyer and tears up that demand letter, and this family puts a hard season behind it. She smiled around the table. "Family carries family," she said. "That's what we do." I sat there and did the math automatically, the same way I calculate drip rates without even deciding to. $185,000 at $300 a month comes out to over 600 payments, 51 years and change. My mother would be 114 years old when the last check cleared. My grandmother would have been gone for decades. It wasn't a repayment plan. It was a funeral schedule for a debt, and everyone at that table knew it, except possibly my father, who was still staring out the window as though the weather might still rescue him. My mother slid the letter across the linen tablecloth and set her own pen on top of it, looking at me with total confidence. Fourth time. Fourth pen. I didn't touch it. I put both hands flat on the table and let my voice come out the way it does over a bed when the monitors start crashing. Low, even, unhurried, because panic is a luxury that only costs other people something. "I signed a document on Monday," I said. "A sworn affidavit with Grandma's attorney. It states that I was never told about the gift, never received it, never consented to it. It's already attached to the demand letter you got Thursday. The truth is already on the record, Mom. It doesn't need my permission anymore, and neither do you." The room fell into that same anniversary dinner silence, except this time nobody was confused about where to look. My mother's face went through 3 seasons in 5 seconds. "You already," she started, and stopped, and I watched her understand that this summit had been lost before the coffee was even poured, that I had walked in already carrying the ending in my coat pocket. Then she went off like a kettle left on too long, exactly the volume I'd been braced for my entire life. Hands flat on the table, china rattling. Ungrateful. Cold. After everything, tearing this family apart over a house. A house. When your sister had nothing, and you were fine. You were always fine. And then it came. The sentence sitting underneath every other sentence, the one she'd said flatly on the phone and now screamed like a creed. "You didn't need it." I let it land. I let it sit there on the linen between us, next to the untouched cake and the pen, and I said quietly, "You're right. I never needed a house. I needed a mother who asked me before she decided what I needed." She opened her mouth to answer, and I finished it for her, because 30 years had been waiting their turn. "I've been carrying this family since I was 11. Dad's paperwork, Paige's rent, twice, your mother's tact, apparently, even my own thank you notes. Family carries family. You're right about that too. You're just the only people I've ever met who won't carry anything back." My father stood up, and for 1 second nobody, including him, seemed to know which way he was going to turn. He turned to the window. Of course he did, standing there gripping the back of his chair, looking out at the yard, present and absent at the exact same time. And that was somehow the most honest thing anyone in that family had done all month. It was my mother who finally cracked, and I want to describe this part carefully, because for about 30 seconds I saw the 16-year-old underneath the 63-year-old, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Her voice dropped out of its scream into something scraped raw and young. "Nobody ever bought me a house," she said. "I was 16 when Daddy's tractor rolled. I raised 2 boys on a stove I could barely reach while she, a hand waved toward my grandmother, not quite pointing, worked nights at the cannery. I gave up my own spot in nursing school. Did you even know that? I was going to be the nurse." A laugh with nothing underneath it. "I asked for help once. Once, in my entire life. And this family told me I was the strong one and handed me the next burden to carry. So no, Claire, you don't get to be the first woman in this family who puts herself first. That is not how any of this works." The room went still. It was the truest thing my mother had ever said to me, and it explained everything, and it excused nothing. Both of those facts just had to sit in the same chair together. Then my grandmother spoke, for the first time since we'd all sat down, very quietly, directly to her daughter. "She isn't the first, Diane. She's the first one I got to stand behind. I couldn't afford to stand behind you. That is the worst debt I have ever carried, and I'm paying it now, to her, because you won't let me pay it to you." My mother looked at her own mother for a long, terrible beat. Then something froze over. The crack in the ceiling sealed itself shut right in front of us, and she turned to me with a face like a locked door and said, "If that affidavit ever reaches a courtroom, you are no daughter of mine." There it was, The price, spoken out loud at last. "Then I'll miss you," I said. "I've had practice. I've been missing you from across this exact table my whole life." Paige made a small sound, and I turned to her, because the next part belonged to the two of us. I'd been carrying it all week, like the card tucked in my coat. "Here's what I came to say," I told the table. "One condition, and it isn't negotiable, and it isn't what any of you are expecting. The money gets repaid to Grandma by the people who took it, not by Owen's roof. This debt belongs to this table, not to a 5-year-old's bedroom." My mother blinked. Paige stopped breathing. "Paige, you get 6 months. Walk into a bank, put a mortgage on that house in your own name, and every dollar goes back to Grandma. Linda will handle the paperwork. You'll be the first person in this family to actually pay for the place you live in. Honestly, it might be good for you." I looked around the table at all of them, and I don't want the house. I want the truth. I know exactly what it feels like to find out the ground underneath you was never really yours. I'm not passing that feeling on to a little boy who draws me holding a balloon. That's the entire difference between me and this family, and it's the only inheritance I actually need. My grandmother reached over and set her hand on mine, that thin wedding band pressing warm against my knuckles, and said to the room, in her seed invoice voice, that was always the point of the gift, so she never has to ask. Then Paige really cracked, not the family's usual half apology, but the whole thing, ugly and wet. "I should have asked where it came from," she said, "first to Grandma, then to me. A free house doesn't just happen to people like me. I knew that. I just didn't want to know it, so I didn't ask." "I'm sorry, Claire. I've been sorry since the anniversary dinner and too much of a coward to actually say it. It was the first honest sentence anyone in that family had given me in years." My mother said nothing at all, and her silence was new, not the punishing kind she usually wielded, but the kind that happens when the script finally runs out and there are no more pages left. I left before dessert. There was a symmetry to it I hadn't planned and don't regret. A month earlier, I'd sat at that same table while a lie collapsed over the cake. Now I stood up while the truth settled over it instead, and both times, nobody quite knew the right etiquette for the moment. I kissed my grandmother's cheek, stuck my head into the den where Owen was upside down on the couch, and told him I owed him a pizza, which turned out to be the only debt in this whole story that got settled that same week. My father followed me out onto the porch, hands in his pockets, scanning a clear sky for something to talk about instead. "She'll come around, Claire," he said. "She just needs time. You know your mother." I did know my mother. That was the whole problem. I'd known her my entire life and had only just now actually met her. "I'm not waiting anymore, Dad," I said, and it came out gentler than I expected, which is how I knew it was true. Waiting was the one thing I had always done for free. He didn't have a weather report for that. I got in my car, my grandmother's card sitting on the passenger seat where a person would sit, and backed out of that driveway, past the basketball hoop my father had put up for Paige years ago and never took down. In the rearview mirror, the porch light of the house I grew up in got smaller and smaller, and I kept waiting for that to hurt more than it actually did. It took 5 months for every piece of paper to find its rightful name, faster than Linda expected, and slower than my mother wanted. There was no courtroom. A clean paper trail has a way of negotiating for you. Faced with a conversion lawsuit they couldn't win, and their own signatures sitting right there in the record, my parents refinanced the Beaver Creek house they'd owned free and clear since I was in high school. It covered most of it. Paige covered the rest, the way I'd asked her to. She walked into a credit union terrified, with 2 years of dental office pay stubs and a folder I'd helped her organize, because apparently I can be furious at my sister and still alphabetize her tax returns at the same time. She signed the very first mortgage of her life on the house she lives in her own name. 214 Meadowlark Lane finally started getting paid for by the woman who actually lives there. The wire back to my grandmother cleared on a Tuesday in October, $185,000, and Linda closed the file with no criminal referral, because the point had never been handcuffs. The point was the ledger, and the ledger was finally true. My mother has spoken to me exactly once since that Saturday. A Christmas card, the kind with a cardinal printed on it, signed Mom. No note. I sent one back, signed Claire. 2 stubborn women, 1 alphabet apart. Maybe that changes someday. The force that made her who she is hasn't gone anywhere. I've stopped trying to talk her out of it. My father calls on Sundays and talks about football, never once about the weather in that dining room anymore. Paige and I get coffee once a month. No scripts, both of us slowly learning the strange new dialect of sisters who actually tell each other the truth. Owen still has his rocket ship drawn in chalk on the driveway. He'll never know what it almost cost him. And honestly, that right there is the whole victory. And my grandmother gave the gift again, properly this time. A transfer with my name directly on it, a gift letter drafted by Linda, witnessed, taxed at exactly nothing, exactly as the law always allowed. I'll admit the embarrassing part, because this story doesn't work without it. My first instinct was to refuse. I actually said, "Grandma, I can't take this," out loud, like a reflex, like a knee jerking under a little hammer. 34 years of training announcing itself all at once. My grandmother looked at me for a long moment and said, "Try again." So I tried again. I said, "Thank you." It took everything I had. In December, I closed on a house. 9 showings, my own inspector, my own signature on every single line, a little brick place 10 minutes from the hospital with a kitchen window that catches the morning sun. Gus the plant lives on that windowsill now, thriving, smug about it. And taped inside the cabinet door where I keep my coffee mugs, where I see it every single morning before a shift, is an ivory card, soft at the corners, 2 years late, and right on time. For Claire, so you never have to ask anyone for a roof again. Love, Grandma. I never framed it. Frames are for things that are finished, and I read it like instructions instead. If your family only loves you for what you can carry, put it down, because the people who truly love you will pick up the other end, and the ones who just stood there watching were never lifting anything at all. That's my story. A question over an anniversary cake, a sealed card hidden in a china cabinet, and one signature my family never saw coming. If you've ever been the strong one, the one whose share kept quietly getting rerouted because you'd manage, I would honestly love to hear your story in the comments. And if you want more stories about quiet women who finally stop paying for everyone else's peace, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for listening.